Don. I made the mistake of thinking that Don was the chair of the DC authorizer. He says he was the vice chair. He was sort of like the man behind the curtain, basically. But I met Don like 1 billion years ago when he was running the Lexington Institute. And I think most people think your time as an authorizer in DC was very successful. I would describe DC as like one of the more highly regulated authorizing environments out there, despite the, what's the word, the mosaic of schools that are authorized, right? We could talk about that a little bit more. And now you are microschool crusader. Can we talk a little bit about that transition and ultimately about the Southern Nevada Micro Academy, which I think you helped co-found? Sure.
Is this thing working?
You got to turn it on. It's green, yes.
Thanks. So thanks to the incredibly talented people that I had the good fortune to work with when we took over the DC authorizing shop and Nevada, where I was a statewide authorizer, I like to think that we had the most success that we've seen in the charter sector, quality and in terms of market share when we were through. The work of a charter authorizer done right but it is somewhat simple. You enforce the law, you don't write them. And by all of the measures, and in the beginning, we got to design a system for what success meant in the charter school space. And I, as an authorizer, would love to prioritize the academic growth of individual kids over the time that you had them, because that tells you a lot more about your value add than it does about the household that the child woke up in the morning. We had some real success. And then I moved to Nevada. I've been an education researcher for my whole career. At some point, I decided we know a lot about what research tells us. Let's go ahead and solve America's challenges. And Southern Nevada felt a lot more like the future of America than the Washington, D.C. quite mature landscape where we really do trust parents, and parents do a very good job.
Wait, you mean Washington, D.C. is in the center of the world?
You
can laugh, people.
And with apologies perhaps to Newark, the highest per pupil funding in the history of the universe. It's a very great, generous. That said, the accomplishments of the team and the incredible leaders who got together in church basements at the start of the charter school movement, those inspirational educators that changed lives, really made an impact. And then I was in Nevada and pandemic hit. I was in talking to the leadership of the city of North Las Vegas, the poorest, hardest working, fastest growing city in Nevada, about some more school choice stuff, how to locate a career tech charter school in North Las Vegas. North Las Vegas has always been feeling mistreated by the 5th largest school district in the country, the Clark County Schools, going back for 30 years. And then pandemic hit, and it became very obvious that that school district wasn't going to be there to serve their families. So I had always admired microschools. I had been somewhat skeptical as a charter authorizer that the charter authorizing world was going to be nimble and savvy enough to really get microschools up to their potential. Microschools can be designed around the individual learners that you're serving in ways that the charter school approach is about identifying a model and replicating it and bringing it in. And authorizers intrinsically, especially as they get larger, tend to, some really smart people like Julie Squire at Bellwether have written about why charter schools don't seem able to really approve any really innovative charter schools, and charter schools went from being sponsors to being authorizers, and it became, there's some really, really talented people in the space doing some really good work. But in microschools, the city of North Las Vegas, where 3/4 of our kids were more than 2 grade levels behind, and that's at the start of the pandemic. I knew from the work that I had done that we could do something really innovative, and we had some really incredible ed tech and other partners. Cadence Learning was fantastic. We built a program that included a strong social justice component. We had a team. The city, we donated our time, but the city used city dollars completely outside of per pupil funding streams to authorize funding in their rec centers and libraries, which they already own and were already open, and the city has an IT department. So they were a very active partner in the work. And I had to promise them that we would deliver 125% of the academic growth of the sending schools where the kids came from. And I knew from our work that we could do that. I also know the reform fatigue that comes in places like the charter sector, where high single-digit growth year over year is a real accomplishment. So we did it at the end of the day, and we did case studies with the Center for Reinventing Public Education and the RAND Corporation that validate the test scores. Our kids averaged 200% academic growth in math and something close to that in reading in the same ballpark. And so many of them, about 100 kids in the program, and these were single grandmother who's a bartender households. So many of our fifth graders had been retained twice, had phenomenal success using some of the real state of, the real best. I had the good fortune when I was back in DC to lead the nation's first fellowship for school district superintendents who were transitioning their school district to personalized learning, and I had a really talented team in education elements doing the technical work with me. We saw what was possible. I knew 125% was very possible. Anyway, that was North Las Vegas, and those families never want to go back. And it was complete. It was free for all families, including free breakfast and lunch. For families that withdrew from the school district and became homeschoolers and follow all of the rules of Nevada's homeschooling laws. So we really appreciated from our families what it was about this model that they loved, and shifted into the movement building world of microschooling. We have a fantastic movement of 23 really vibrant microschools in North Las Vegas that include microschools that simply care more about a child's social and emotional growth than they do about their academic growth, or very reasonable families that have doubts about the state academic content standards, preparing their own children for the future that they're going to have and not the future that we had when we were their age. Microschooling is really taking off around the country. And as we had the opportunity to do more trainings in different states and figured out the value added that we could do to really help this emergent sector grow, researchers are now telling us that there are between 1.1 and 2.2 million learners participating in microschools full-time nationally, upwards of 2%, which is the market share of Catholic schools in this country. Catholic schools, by the way, represent an important, there are some fantastic leaders of Catholic education who recognize microschooling as a powerful way to reach families, and that's important to keep in mind. Urban, Hispanic, and Black are the three groups of parents polling is most likely to form or join a learning pod, all above 50%. I will say that in Nevada, where we have a few private school leaders of color and one charter school leader of color, the microschooling sector truly represents the population of the state of Nevada, families and leaders in powerful ways. And with 3.5 million leaders flocking to non-public schooling, as we just learned from the Titan data, which is private or homeschooling, between spring of 21 and spring of 22, this is a powerfully important moment in education. It really launched during the pandemic, but it caused families to fundamentally reevaluate their relationships with the institutions that they historically relied upon to solve their education needs in meaningful ways. We have very, very diversified microschooling. And this is a sector that is a many flowers bloom sector. So in launching the National Microschooling Center, we really wanted to reflect that and support it in ways that matter to them. And as we see an incredible opportunity to serve families that had never been school choice families previously, we see amazing opportunities where the Valley Education Fund is fundamentally reshaping American philanthropy. I can't talk about how important that is. And our microschools are able to work with that vision and also with venture capital, right? Where I highly recommend Sebastian Nalby's History of Venture Capital, so that those of you who lead microschools who are working with those investors can understand the trends in that sector as well, and how can we really position this as a sector that meets the needs of families in real ways in this watershed moment. And couldn't be more thrilled to be here on the green pastures of Harvard University, preaching a model that I like to talk about our microschools often as the 1863 model of microschools, which is trendy and faddish if you happen to be Harvard University. But for the rest of us, it's powered by pedagogies and approaches to learning and technology and some incredible ed tech tools that make a pretty exciting sector.
So what's the one thing that you, in your authorizing capacity in DC and Nevada, thought parents would never want or care about, that in your microschooling capacity you found they care about or want deeply or greatly?
Early on in the days of charter school authorizing, I lost a fight I hated to lose. And that was that you could measure individual charter schools based on mission-specific measures of performance. That if you were in a performing arts charter school, or you were to focus on nature and ecology, that you could measure the school for consequence based on the mission of the school. And I lost that fight, and it hurt to lose. And we can't afford to lose that again as the microschooling sector continues to grow. But parents very much care about that. They very much understand how that's preparing their children for their children's future. And the more involved in it in microschool opportunities around the country, the more I believe how true that is.
Thank you. So I have other questions which I'm going to prompt, but I'm going to open it up to everybody as well. So if you have a question, you can raise your hand. I just want everybody to know that a question is a short sentence that goes up at the end. Right? If when you're doing it, it doesn't feel that way, it's not a question. So, okay, so I want to put the important part at the end up front. Maybe we're sort of in the middle of it, but maybe we're in the second paragraph of this. So how do you pay for all of this? Can we talk a little bit about revenue streams? Obviously, Prenda is sort of a creature of charter law in some interesting ways. And Don, you mentioned a partnership with the city of North Las Vegas, which is not the school district of North Las Vegas. So we'll talk about those things and talk about what you think we should be doing to create the incentives and finances to help more folks get this kind of education.
Yeah, and in her absence, so I will say about Michaela, she was my mentor at 4.0 Schools, runs an incredible school in Atlanta, that if anyone's in Atlanta, you should try to see the live school. These young people are having transformational experiences, and that's a private school. So there's another option. She shoots for low cost.
And the Zucchini's homeschool co-op is the other thing there.
There you go. Yeah, so Prenda, I mean, like I said at the beginning, we said upfront, I actually don't have a stake. I didn't understand the way all of this works. I've quickly learned, maybe not quickly, over 5 years, I've figured out how education funding in America works. It's complicated, as you all know. I said, I just think it should be free. Like, people pay taxes and then they go to school. Like, that was my simplistic way of thinking about it. The way that I initially started was I partnered with charter schools. So charter school students are enrolled as virtual learners, and then we offer this program through a contract with the virtual school. We've done that in multiple states, multiple partnerships. We've also worked with districts. So we actually don't have I don't have a horse in the race. I say any school leader that has the authority to authorize, it tends to be that it fits through virtual type programs, because the rules around brick and mortar are very, very constrictive. And you think of 200 years of regulatory capture, like it's like people's brains explode when you start to see, like, oh, this is in a dance studio, and what about the fire extinguisher? And it's like, well, we can make it work, but it takes working together creatively. So that's been the majority of what we've done. I think something like 20% of our students use the ESA program. So we're active in Arizona. We work in New Hampshire with actually an additional program there with some state or some federal funding administered through the Department of Ed. So I've said I don't actually care. I'm really interested in Don's model. I remember when you were talking to me about North Las Vegas, it's like, how's this going to work? And I've been watching with fascination, so I'd love to learn more about that. So to me, the question is more of, we've got different structures in place. How can we put this together for kids, and then, deal with the appropriate trade-offs? And as you guys know, the charter school, or the, working inside of a growing list of regulatory concerns, that adds a lot of cost and complexity to what we do. So it's an open question always, is like, can we make sure all the boxes are checked, all the political entities are happy, and still offer this program, under this format?
Don?
So they tell us that the overall taxpayer investment in the K-12 education sector in this country is about 4% of GDP. Or I like to say, reasonable people can disagree as to whether or not that's appropriate or too high or too low, but at its present very low level of productivity, it's probably not sustainable, especially as we look at the crunch that's going to happen in state houses with education budgets. The microschooling, in so many ways, is about bringing new resources into education. We see microschooling in 3 different tracks: independent microschools, partnership microschools like we did in North Las Vegas, and network microschools. And Kelly, Prenda was a fantastic partner in North Las Vegas. Thank you for the excellence that your program added to our work. In partnership microschools, we're doing another partnership microschool with a rural county library in rural Nevada, where it's just like North Las Vegas. It's completely outside of education funding streams, but the county board of supervisors and the county library, they already have a library, are setting up a microschool there. We passed Nevada's most family-friendly law is the TOTS grant program that gives $5,000 grants, broadly speaking, for education uses to special needs, broadly defined families, and has been extended to foster families as well. Employers, Nevada is a place where employers are fighting tooth and nail for the same pool of employees. So investors and employers are looking at ways that they can be a value add to their employees, especially in places where they have to work on military bases or places that have notoriously bad schools. So that's another place where partnership microschools are really turning out interesting ways. So certainly a microschool leader can, sometimes they're already vested in their school district retirement fund. And, we had one that vested on a Friday and by prior arrangement joined us on a Monday with her 2 daughters. But some of the sustainability comes from these good people giving of themselves to find a place to serve their own children. And maybe they don't, that energy doesn't mean that the model is about a $25 million building that lasts for this many years and has lifelong educators doing it. The human capital piece to microschooling is fascinating and rich with opportunity. But I think the sustainability for the sector is very much there, as long as we can continue to be productive in meeting the needs of families who are, for what they're looking to have their needs met.
So the other side of this conversation about finance is the like the cost for change. So normally, if you want to do something different, you have to commandeer a district, you have to start a charter school, right? Facility, 500 kids, something like that, or you have to start an independent school, which means you have a strong relationship with the deity, or a very hierarchical institution, something like that. This is 10 kids in a dream, right? Essentially, what role do you think the microschooling device serves in helping us figure out what could be possible versus like whatever we have now?
So I'll go first and love to hear from Don too. Part of the work we're doing, and I don't know if I realized this when I started, right? I knew that this was working for kids, that there were great experiences. What I found was a community of adults who want to be involved in education, who have a lot of energy around it. And I think we're seeing this show up in a variety of ways, including, interrupting school board meetings and, showing up in elections. And there's lots of things going on. But parents and others, former educators included, wanted a chance to channel positive energy, right? Like, I want to show up and not, this was our experience as parents in good schools was, thanks for being here, Mr. Smith. Like, we'd like you to staple papers in the back of the room. Like, okay, but I could do more than that. Like, I can help. And it wasn't wanted, it wasn't welcome. Like, the system is set up on this assumption that parents want to sort of passively receive, that kids want to sit and passively receive. And what I think is blowing my mind is how many people are out there saying, hey, let me be part of the solution. So the reason they don't, right? How hard is it to start a charter school? You can't start a a public school, right? You have to be part of the entity, or religious school. I think you pointed out, right? So I mean, there's like limitations. What can I really do? Do I have to be a business person and a politician to put this together? That drastically reduces the number of people that can participate. Well, if you lower that hurdle and then throw a $10,000, $2,500 VELA grant their direction, right? Like, hey, here's a little bit of funding to put the space together. Here's a program that allows you to do it, and we'll background check you and help you with internet safety and a checklist for safety at your site. And here's a program that you can run and customize it the way you want. That you just think of that hurdle just going down, down, down till the point where somebody says, I could do that. And this is my favorite thing. So we'll see these parents send their kid 1 year to somebody else, and then they're watching school. It's like, I could do that. Next year, they've got a microschool in their house. And it's when you start putting that together, it starts to feel like a critical mass and a reaction. And I have a nuclear background, so I'm sorry for being weird about it. But that's that's kind of the excitement of it. This energy source that's been completely shut out. It's been untapped, and it's real. I think we've all underestimated it, and it's now showing up in really positive, exciting ways for kids.
But Kelly is not saying you need to be a nuclear physicist to start a microschool. Don?
Right.
The other end of the intellect spectrum, here's the non-nuclear physicist. The a universal ESA model is an incredible tool for letting families do incredibly innovative things like microschooling. Then again, we were on the ground in West Virginia, in Huntington, West Virginia, and Charleston, where the ESA has gotten delayed, and those amazing life-changing microschools opened anyway. Because I've found that families at the most fragile ends of the income spectrum are the ones not responding to the pandemic so much, but responding to the new economy and really want to do something to prepare their learners for it. I was also a part of the group that originally got the Washington, D.C. Opportunity Scholarship Program passed. And we always have to remember that the deals that get made at the last minute, when you have a great sounding school choice program, even when you have a veto-proof majority, deals get made. And in DC, we had to, for instance, exclude all of the amazing private schools outside of the district boundaries. That program has absolutely demonstrated academic growth of its participants, but it could have been so much more without those political deals that had to happen. And I think about that, and I look at microschooling and laws like in states like West Virginia that define microschooling, thereby opening up the opportunity for regulation. And maybe as investors, whether they be philanthropic or venture capital, or maybe it's when dollars follow the kid, when public dollars follow the kid, that deals that might compromise the incredible potential of microschooling become a possibility. So I'm particularly interested in finding ways where dollars can come from outside of education tax dollars earmarked for education to solve microschooling in particularly innovative ways that meet the needs of families outside the box that we've created.
So I do want to talk some more about regulation, which is sort of the enemy of the future. But one of the things you've both touched on, which I think is particularly important. So I can remember early in the pandemic, the New York Times writing a piece about like the $25,000 pod in Westchester or like out on Long Island or something like that. And I argued with some friends of mine that at 707 Baker Street, which was the house right next to the house I grew up in Southwest Baltimore in the 70s, that we'd been potting forever. And that the only thing that was sort of missing was not industry, but money for low-income folks to get in on the potting game. Can you talk a little bit about how this is played out across sort of like class / race and your experience at this point? I mean, obviously it would have been phenomenal to have Michaela speak about this as well because she's living it, but there are notes of this in your respective testimony, and I don't want to leave it out. So Don, why don't you go first?
Part of pandemic, when you started reading in the New York press about the pandemic pods, it raised more questions for me than it answered. Are these things effective? Are they equitable? And I wanted to make sure that anything we were going to do was going to be measurable and was going to be equitable. And working with the incredible forward-thinking leadership of the city of North Las Vegas, all elected Democrats at the time, was an incredibly powerful experience. And I cared how it went. They were in the microschools often kicking the tires and making sure that families were happy customers, and they really were. And we had some political pressure because of the families that had to withdraw from the school district to attend the microschool for free. That said, that reality, right? And the minute you become, as this movement grows from 2% to maybe it can get to 10%, I believe that it can, then you definitely get a target on your back. And on the one hand, you have reasonable, responsible caretakers of the taxpayer's dollar, wanting to make sure that their dollars are being well spent. On the other hand, does a microschool get capped at 100 kids? I would vehemently say no, because there's some fantastic microschools on multiple campuses that serve more than 100 kids. And we have to really be vigilant about what about that. I mean, I also, when No Child Left Behind was passed, we wondered, are families going to care enough that their state academic metrics were rigorous enough that they don't have that race to the bottom that some of us published articles that in fact, what about reasonable families now that are looking at their state's academic content standards, or looking at the ways that their 43-person high school classroom is preparing their kid for their own future, and the future that they're going to have in the new economy, and wondering if the ways that we have of measuring success are adequate to measure this exciting, most exciting new education storyline in a generation. And I would say, even now, we look at microschooling, and we can't fool ourselves to think we know what it's going to look like 5 years from now. Kelly, you got a great sense of that, and we can't fall into that trap.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say everybody should start asking yourself, what is it going to look like? And then just be open to being wrong, right? I think the fun part about it for me is, how do you open it up as much as possible, talk about outcomes like you guys are doing, and then say, so this is something that happens, right? You put this thing together. We're supporting hundreds of microschools all over the country. So then we start hiring experts. There's a lot of certified teachers, people with whole careers, and their heart is right there with us. They're ready to change everything, and they're used to top-down control, right? This is what they're, so we have these awkward conversations where it's like, well, what I need to do is I need to get into all the microschools with my rubric, and then boom, 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 boom. And I'm like, whoa, you just took away any chance of being wrong, right? Like, I think what you have to do instead is say, like, these things are not negotiable. Kids have to be safe. We have to be, helping people learn to read. There's lots of room inside of that for, what if this is better? What if that's better? And so I see us as really an opportunity to run that experiment and do that work. Experiment's a terrible word to use, with children involved. Obviously, the safety has to be there and the core academics have to be there. But I think there's lots that's going to change as we go forward in the future. So I'm actually really excited about that. And when I go and visit, I try to stop by microschools as often as I can, walk in, see the kids, meet the guide. Each one's different. Each child's different. You look at these kids and it's like, hey, somebody has found a home here in this micro community, and they're having transformational experiences, even if they're still behind academically. And many of our kids come in behind and they're working their way. You can see that they're on a path, right? Because they've decided, I own this. I'm going to catch myself up. I'm going to do this. And in the process, I'm going to do a bunch of creative projects and collaborate, have these Socratic discussions about whether robots are going to take all our jobs. It's all the fun stuff that should be education. You see this all kind of coming together. So I feel really excited about what's happening with microschools.
So let's talk about the pandemic. And sort of two questions living on top of one another. So like we mentioned in the beginning, obviously Prenda predates the pandemic, but sort of got to the tip of folks' tongues in part because of school closures and pandemic-related policy. And Don, you're much more straightforward about it. Like SNUMA, is that the SNUMA? SNUMA is absolutely a creature of the pandemic. So on the one hand, just talk about that, right? Like the parents finding you finding them, what it was like sort of navigating the pandemic as a new or like slightly new school model. That's the first half of the question. Second half of the question is, by some reports, 30 years worth of learning have been wiped out for some kids on the latest NAEP tests. I would argue this is a disaster of the highest order, and the policies of the last 2 years are ones we will be living with the outcome of for the next 20. The Times, I think, is shocked that people actually read the data, because the data they published this piece that basically says, oh, it's not that bad, which is offensive and outrageous. What role do you think the microschooling device plays in helping us ameliorate the harm of the last 2 years if at all. If you don't think that I know that question is leading. If you don't think they should play a role, you could also say that as well. So Kelly, why don't you go first?
Yeah, they definitely should play a role. I will say pandemic was hard for everybody and there's all kinds of ramifications, but it wasn't great before. Sal Khan would give these talks where he shows the percentage of like entering, I'm going to get it wrong, but it's sort of freshmen in college that are good at 7th grade math. Michael, help me here. It's like 17% that understand 7th grade math in college. So that was pre-pandemic.
Yes, 1 in 5 Black 4th graders testing at or above proficient on the NAEP reading in 2019.
Yeah, so in terms of I think you can ask a lot of questions about what is it, but if school and learning are in the same sort of sentence, if you would write a definition that includes the word learning along with school, I think you have to say we've got to be open to other things, right? And that's in lots of communities. I think, yeah, what's the answer? Well, I like to point back to times in history. There was this moment in 1957 when Sputnik flew over the United States and American families were going out at night and looking at this little thing that's above us, right? And it's terrifying. And it's like, what does that mean? And what can happen? And the president of the United States implores, hey, I need you to learn math and science, right? And you do see this kind of reaction, this like social reaction. Well, I would say our current situation, even pre-pandemic, but especially with the pandemic, is like societally, we need learners, right? We need people who can actually grapple with the biology and biochemicals and biomaterials and the social issues that we're facing and how can we solve all these problems? Like you've got to, we need kids. We need like this next generation to come together and do this. But that's super lofty, right? That gets completely lost in the show up at school, do the things my teacher asks, try to get an A with the minimum amount of work possible, and then graduate and move on, right? Like if I'm getting shoved along a line, it's the wrong, like those outcomes are never going to happen. And so microschools can fix that. What they do, what you can do in a small environment is one adult who cares about you can see you, know you, understand what makes you tick, and have these real conversations. Do I have time to share just one story? We do this activity with all the kids at Prenda called Future You. You make an actual representation of your 30 years later self. So this boy was 10. He made a 40-year-old version of himself. And this guy, his teacher had came to me actually when he pulled out of her class to join my micro school and said, I'll just tell you, I'm 30 years into my career. I've never had a kid like this. So good luck. She was like, he's going to be hard. So his future you was literally, this is the boy. He's sitting on a couch. He made a Play-Doh statue. He's on a couch, remote control, soda, and he's leaning back like this. And and this is his like incarnation of himself. Like
that was me this morning.
Actually. Yeah, exactly. I'm like, awesome. Okay, so let's talk about your art. Like tell me about it. Let's engage. What exactly do you see? He's like, nothing. Like I want to watch TV. That's what I want to do. And I'm like, so what about like work or whatever? Nope, just what? So who buys the soda? Who pays for the cable package? I try to do the little, we're having this, it's a failure, right? And this was like 1 week into school. He's like, I didn't get anywhere with this boy. And I'm his learning guide. So I'm thinking, is this going to show up in his motivation? How's he going to do because what you try to do with future you and all the other kids, this worked fine, was here's future you, talk to future you about the effort you're going to put in right now so that you can be that person, right? That makes sense to a lot of people, but for this kid, it did not. So it was interesting then. We got into it. We spent, week after week, month after month. I'm sort of pulling his hair a little bit. His mom's helping. We're kind of together trying to just keep him moving forward through because you can't just sit there and do nothing. So, but he didn't own it yet. He didn't feel this ownership. And eventually we got into, I happened to like computer programming. I kind of showed him on the side some tools that are pretty fun and you can make your own things. And I had this background in this, right? And so he wanted it. Once he saw it, he was like, oh, I want to do that. I want to do coding. And I was this reward, right? Finish your math and English goals, and then you can get into coding. Every day he started working hard on math and English, getting to coding. He would do it. And we had this side conversation. It's like 6 months later, way later. It took a long time. And he says, he's talking about like something about the future. And he's talking about pursuing a PhD in computer science. And I was like, Graham, I'm like, you got to remember you sitting on the couch doing nothing. And now you're talking about a PhD in computer science. And he was like, oh yeah, I guess I did. It's like, this is transformational. That's not me. Like, I couldn't do that if I had 30 kids. I would never know. I wouldn't even know what was in his heart or mind or anything. And I definitely wouldn't have been able to experiment with different things that might like bring him out. So structurally, right? We talk about a microschool. I happened to be the adult in that story, but like lots and lots of people could do that for a child. And you see the change. I mean, he and I stay in touch. He's entering high school now. He's doing great. Like you see these things happen for one kid at a time, and it's very personal, and it's inviting an adult to be there for one kid at a time. So ultimately, that's what gets me really excited. And the microschool format, the way it works, the reason it works is what I talked about before. There's energy out there. There's people that want to contribute in these ways, and they just need a path in. They need to be invited to the conversation.
I love being a microschool parent. I know you do too. We have 3 kids at the most. Student-centered is one of the most meaningless terms in education. And there are practitioners in this room who really do impressive student-centered stuff. But our microschool is the most child-centered institution that would not have any place in a charter school setting. And I love it. When we went into North Las Vegas, we had to promise, first and foremost, every member of our team that I hired, that we would trust families and have a relationship with families so that they were, and Michael, your work was very influential to me as well. This is a shift in paradigm to an active learner paradigm where the families are going to be a partner. And we would sit down and say, after our initial assessments, this looks like second grade work to us. And that's a tough conversation to have. But then we would talk about goals and say, here's what would need to happen for you can really get back on grade level this year if these are your weekly goals. And we not only set weekly goals, but we reflected on them meaningfully every week. And we would know it takes knowing when a first grade boy is with dad this week and dad gets off work at 1 o'clock. So every day that kid's going to get a headache at 12:45, and understanding that about that child lets us set goals appropriately. And that kid did hit his goals because that child owned his goals. And in the personalized learning world, we learned about getting a teacher to own their goals and a learning guide and a microschool and a family and a kid. So that buy-in, that's the secret sauce that so many of us work. The family is an active partner. And in North Las Vegas, where these families had just been disrespected, and I sometimes work as a court-appointed expert in school quality, and the tragic stories that happen with special needs kids and families just not invited to be part of their IEP team, which is illegal. So many aspects of microschooling is families who are reevaluating their relationships and really taking an active role in their learners' future trajectory in meaningful ways is exciting to me as a fan of American education. And let's face it, I've got an anti-authority stigma mile wide. So many of us in this work do. We couldn't do it without it.
That's why you wore a tie.
Right. But this is a new paradigm that is so exciting for what it is we want out of education in the first place. That's why I paid it.
So I've been here for 45 minutes. This all sounds great. Who's against it?
Oh, I thought you were asking for a poll.
Oh, no. I mean, look, Kelly, and by the way, we are in the final 15 minutes. So again, if you have short sentences that go up at the end, I'm happy to take them. On Ricochet, Kelly, there was a great piece I read called "Microschools Are a Big Success. The NEA is attacking them for it." Apparently, not everybody is on the microschool train. Can we talk a little bit about the friction that the policy or organizational friction that might exist against these wonderful new things?
Yeah, look, it's different, right? This is different. There's a lot of inertia in the way school is done, and I don't actually fault anybody. What I'd say is, let's have a conversation. If we can have that conversation around kids, we find common ground almost every time, right? I'm here for kids. So many people in traditional education are also here for kids. There are, unfortunately, some who are not, right? And that should be known. It should be understood. Because of that, we have to operate things differently, and we've paid for help in navigating things. But I don't see myself as some sort of, David Goliath, like, let's go have a fight. That's not the goal, right? It's like we've got kids in these settings that need to be invited to become empowered learners. And if I can do that, we've tried. I've had failed partnerships with districts, right, with school districts, and it's often the same conversation. We'll get the academic folks at the school very excited because they're thinking, we've tried project-based learning, it hasn't happened. Blended learning makes so much sense. Why don't we do everything on mastery? It's like, we just can't, right? But under Microschool, you could do it that way. So the academic people have gone through the safety requirements with the legal teams. They're ready to go. The finance people love it because it costs less to educate kids this way. So we put this all together, bring it to the school board, and just, like, how might this feel for the teachers? And the teachers, by the way, that I know love it. They're like, please let me do this. Like, give it to me. But you get the sense, and so even where they say I don't want to undermine adult interests, they might still say, we still like the model, we think we should do it, right? And so at that point, I become a resource or a material, here, do it. Here's all the tools. I'd love to see more people doing this, whether or not that means anything for me personally or my organization.
Oh yeah, no, I'm sorry. I meant everybody. If you were in the room, you could ask a question. Go ahead, Doug.
We've got some questions, about 50 people online who are firing away questions.
Oh, okay, I wonder. Okay. Yeah. You have information I don't have. So.
Daniel, let's get a microphone.
You sure? Educational student outcomes properly for university life or the workforce. And I would just add to that, is there, what is an appropriate way to assess or evaluate whether microschools are working? So whether it's public funds or private school or private funds going to microschooling, people want to know, has that investment been worth it in some way? So how do we assess the value of microschooling beyond just parents selecting that?
And can I add one other vector to this? So how do you do it without putting your finger on the scale for what is created?
Well, you're by definition, you're playing with that tension. I would say I wouldn't discount, you said very briefly, without counting parents. I think parents should definitely be counted. So if we can agree on that, I think parents decide what food their kids eat and like what clothes their kids put on and what medical decisions. Parents should have a say in this. And I think that sense of, well, that's a little thing that doesn't count. Like, I think we got to be real careful about that. We maybe look to Virginia to understand that, right? I think what I would say about the rest of it is, what is learning to you, right? And parents are going to have different actually answers to that. So there's people that are really focused on math test scores. And so we just, the answer is transparency, right? Like, let's share with everybody. Here's where we're at as system-wide. But more importantly, here's what happens with your particular learning guide. I mean, you actually can't get that data inside of a public school. Like my teacher, I don't know, are kids growing in math? It exists, that data exists, but you can't get it, right? And so parents are talking, they're trying to figure it out. That's the data source in sort of the de facto. I think we can do better by sort of surfacing all of this, right? And bringing it, and I won't pretend that we've built that out yet. We're still in a process to do that, but that's my vision, is let's make that data readily available, starting with, can a kid himself or herself see the progress, right? Can I see where am I at relative to my kind of third grade mastery in core academic subjects? And the data exists, it's there. So we're on a process of bringing that all to light.
Marty, do you want to jump in on that?
So I'm curious, as I hear you talk about this model, sort of where the core curricular content comes from. So Kelly, you refer to yourself as a guide in the school.
Right.
You talk about sort of making sure the student is working through his reading and math goals for the day.
Yep.
So is this is this all dependent on high quality online content that engages students? And, is that just a sort of a straightforward approach, or is it, I don't know, more personalized by algorithms? Just where's the core content coming from?
Yeah, great question. So this is going to be a different answer for different people. Like the role of teachers in driving instruction is going to vary. I think Your guides probably do more than my guides. Michaela's teachers do more for sure. So just take that with salt. Our approach is to lower that hurdle, right? So I don't need content experts and business people and politicians. So I need somebody who can love kids and guide them through and help mentor them and motivate them to be learners. So what does that mean for the model? Our model has 3 modes: Conquer, Collaborate, Create. Just briefly, Conquer mode is blended learning using external tools mostly. It's standards aligned, it's mastery based. So kids master a subject, move to the next one, and they can see their progress, right? The actual, you could see I'm 67% of the way through my grade level content for English or math. And then my goal by the end of this week is 69%, right? I can see myself moving through as I go. We have Collaborate mode, which is a structured group activity, again, led by kids, helped facilitated by the adult, but the real meat of it is given to them. We've created that program. And then we have Create mode, which is project-based learning. We've created project prompts, and the kids work together to build those. So they're learning in different ways.
Trust parents or you don't. And impact matters. Impact
Absolutely matters. And just because you're using taxpayer dollars, whether or not you're part of a government monopoly, doesn't make you equitable. When half of all Black 14-year-old boys are below basic in math, whose future is that preparing them for? That said, impact does matter. And for our microschoolers that don't want to ever see their kid, or their parents that don't ever want to see their kid measured against, in a norm reference test measured against other kids, I often think in public education accountability, and I don't know what the future of that regime looks like right now, but maybe the only thing that should matter is the academic growth of the kid that you have over the time that you have them, because that really is your value added. So it's going to be fascinating to watch the microschoolers demonstrate their impact to their families and to some extent to their investors and to their stakeholders. But the closer you are to the kids and the closer you understand their goals and their progress to those goals, those are the people that understand that. Is that a go?
What groups were against you and why?
In our case, when I've been a school choice advocate for a long time, and they've never come after me harder personally than they did when kids were disenrolling and becoming homeschoolers. And frankly, the base of the homeschooling movement that's been intrinsic to this country since the start, but was only legal in a lot of states since the 80s, got real nervous as more mainstream families became microschoolers because they didn't feel like their needs were being met. And suddenly we've got a base that we've never had before of families that, whatever their social strata, are known to the lawmakers and their social circles wherever they're from, because they truly are representative of the overall population that we've not had in many school choice jurisdictions before. So when the fantastic 5th grade girl who's been retained twice is really thriving in our microschool, and her family members are particularly close to the leadership of the teacher union, that's how you win. That's how you really have happy families that don't want to see this thing go away. And we're going to have those pressures. And it's more the school district partisans than it is the school district leadership that had a problem with us, and the shameless adult problems. I was making life difficult for their grown-ups who are responsible for their budgeting at the school level because it complicated the budgeting process. Really? That's what you want to talk about? But that was what made the papers. And that's what we're going to have to count on steamrolling as we grow.
And the percentage of Black homeschoolers has tripled in the last couple of years too. Daniel?
Hello, my name is Ebony, and I am at Hugsy this year, and I have the opportunity to work with Derrell.
It's not a plant. The question is not.
No, it's not a plant. It's not a plant. I do have a question about how this scales. I myself have lots of friends who homeschool, but something I have to look at in the mirror is that my friends are highly educated. And I've always said that if I had children, I think about homeschooling my children. But that comes with a lot of privilege. That comes with having a partner who would be able to support me being able to homeschool. That comes with having access to a lot of education resources. So how does this scale for families that don't necessarily have those resources? And I might have missed this. Is there funding for families to be able to get those kinds of resources that they might need?
Yeah. You want to go?
I think the funding question I'll answer really depends on the college absolutely can follow the child, as some of the other school choice vehicles that I mentioned. As for scaling, in the charter school sector, scaling looks one way. I don't know if I've ever really believed in scale in education ever, to be honest. But in microschooling, the ability to serve more families by knowing the learners and building microschools around those particular learners and having more leaders, whether they're mid-career professionals or wherever the background of that. We've seen all sorts of thriving backgrounds for microschooling leaders. That's the, and solving facilities, right? Because facilities are really the big ticket item. And there's some pretty talented people in this room who've done some real thought about that facility space that takes that aspect of the cost away. It's a question in front of us, one that we don't have answered. But as far as growth, I see some real promising pathways to get there.
Yeah, and I'll just add from Prenda's perspective, if you kind of do quintiles of the kind of socioeconomic, we don't actually do really well on either of the two extremes. The one extreme is sort of like, I've solved this problem by moving into such and such neighborhood or sending my kid to such and such private school, and that's it. And the other end, I think, is like you're getting at. It's like, we've tried to take this hurdle as far down as possible. It's not all the way down, right? There still is, and that's something we're constantly looking at, thinking about, what does that mean? How do we do this? How do we make this available? I think what would surprise you is, you look at national averages for homeschoolers, the number's less than $1,000 a year. It's something like $800 that they spend on resources. Now, they've already paid taxes, so it's not all the money that they're spending for education, but that's the money out of pocket. So we think you might think of homeschooling from one perspective or from the friends that we know that do it, but there's lots of people that are making it work. What we find, I talk to the lurkers in the homeschool communities, right? People who are like, yeah, that would be so fun.
A lurker?
The lurker.
Okay.
You know what lurkers are?
I know now.
So they're in social media just watching it all. Because the loud ones, they actually hate Prenda. They don't want microschools. They're like, I've got this figured out. But the lurkers are like, man, that looks interesting. I would love that, but seems like a lot of work, like, what do I do? And I don't know if I want to have my kid with me all day. And so these are just regular people in the middle of that distribution who are like, I like some of the things about it, but I don't know if I could make that jump. And so what microschools are doing for them is saying, okay, well, you actually don't have to do all of it, right? You can send your kid to somebody's house. Maybe one of your friends could be that person, create this new opportunity. It's kind of like sending your child to school, but you're more involved. But you get all these great aspects like the story I shared earlier, where your child is actually seen as an individual human, and that feels really good. So you put these things together, it's this midpoint. I think there's still questions around scale. I think we're constantly looking at that. Where does this work? Where does this not work? Policy mechanisms, but also just operationally and structurally, how do we lower that sort of hurdle for people to be part of the solutions themselves?
And before we go to our last question, I would just say that for all the policymakers in the room, a year ago, I would have described a truly modern school finance arrangement differently than now. I think a truly modern school finance arrangement has to include direct aid to parents as a portion of it now. So,
yep.
Bring us home, sir.
Well, I think there was one more question.
Is left. Special educational needs. So, one of the most overregulated part of education involves special education. But I think the reason that it is because it's been the hardest thing often for parents to solve on their own. So I just wonder how special educational needs, not the regulatory framework, but the actual needs of children,
right,
are dealt with in microschools, and how you see that evolving as you go forward as well.
I think I can do a 1-minute version of this.
Oh boy, I can't wait to hear.
If you want to divide up special education into 2 categories, accommodations and services. So we've gotten involved with both. We, as participants in the public education world, all of the rules apply, right? So we are partnering with schools, making sure that these things are in place. Every time I meet with the SPED coordinators from the schools and we talk about Prenda's model and how we structured it, on the accommodations piece, they were like, oh, you're already doing literally every accommodation we were going to suggest. So an IEP is like, don't do these constrictive things and these constrictive things. And it's like, we don't for anybody. It's actually been delightful, like really, really easy for us to meet the needs of, like, we'll get an IEP from a past school and we're already complying with all the accommodations. Services are harder, right? We have people spread out. There's folks in really small communities. We don't have the economies of scale to build in all those pieces, but there are clever solutions. I was just sitting at a conference last week there's a whole company that's just exists to deliver scalable, speech services and using technology to be able to do that. So and there's questions on all these things. It's not over, but we're constantly looking for better ways to meet those needs when you get to specific services.
Analysts.